This is ESG Decoded, the podcast powered by Global Affairs Associates to provide relevant, actionable updates related to business innovation and sustainability. Join Caitlin Allen and Amanda Hsieh of Global Affairs Associates for thoughtful, nuanced conversations with industry leaders that explore the complexities, the risks, and the opportunities connected to all things ESG. I'm Yvonne Harris, a consultant and co-host, and I will be collaborating with Caitlin and Amanda for the discussions that we will present on this podcast. Put simply, ESG is everything that is not on your balance sheet. This leaves room for misunderstanding, oversimplification, and the tendency towards one-size-fits-all perspectives. None of that will happen on this podcast. Enjoy this episode.
This is Amanda Hsieh, CEO of Global Affairs Associates, and I'm so glad to be welcoming Amanda Tullos from GreeNexus Consulting on the ESG Decoded podcast today. Amanda is the CEO and founder of GreeNexus Consulting. GreeNexus is a consulting firm with a passion to help create a profitable, just, and regenerative legacy for people, nature, and the built environment. They leverage all opportunities to bring deep value to their clients' processes to create change and embed new patterns. In addition to being named an Enterprising Women of the Year champion, Amanda is also celebrating 10 years in business this year. And we'll definitely talk and explore about that. Welcome, Amanda. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You know, one of the things to huge trends this year that we've been talking as just a society is climate change and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'd love to hear in your work what's happening with the built environment to address these two huge topics.
So for us, we want to move beyond green buildings to living buildings and better align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And one thing that's really interesting about the UN SDGs is that there is a better focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're seeing that get more embedded within the certifications that are on the market. And I also think, 2020 was the year of seeing more clearly how all of these things are coming together. We often talk about the triple bottom line, but certifications in the past have been a little more focused on environment and profitability and not quite so much on diversity and equity. There has been a growing focus on wellness, but now I feel like with this greater transparency and the ability to really see how all of these things are connecting, we are starting to see more people asking about this and including it in their sustainability goals. We're also seeing things out there. For example, the International Living Future Institute has their program for businesses called JUST certification, and we just received our JUST label certification for our company last week.
So, congratulations.
Hot off the press announcement here.
Love it.
Yeah, and so their focus is to require for living building certifications that companies involved within that process be JUST labeled. And so it seems like it's a little bit of kind of a intro step towards B Corp certification. And so it's a little more within reach for some companies, especially larger companies that may have more challenges for implementing different updates to policies and procedures.
So Amanda, break this down a little bit for me. I've heard of LEED before, I think like many people, but give me the kind of 101 on LEED versus living buildings versus JUST. Tell me how they're related or not, but give me the kind of 101. We have Global Affairs, we have a class also called ESG Decoded, where we say we kind of decode the acronym of ESG. And if you could kind of decode a little bit the acronyms of green buildings for us.
Sure, yeah. So back in around 2000, the U.S. Green Building Council created a program to better measure green buildings called LEED, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And it has different areas of concern like sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, and indoor environmental quality. And the certification has prerequisites and credits, which are different strategies. You have to do all the required things, and then you have to get up to a certain number of points to get recognized with different levels of certification. So many certifications go with this approach, with the prerequisites and the credits. But then the Living Future Institute, which was then the Cascadia chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council, said, hey, we think that buildings need to go faster, more quickly, and we want to issue a challenge to create living buildings. And so the market sort of came back and said, okay, put your money where your mouth is and show us how to do this thing that you say we should create. And so they did. They created the Living Building Challenge, which is all prerequisites to say. So these are all things that you have to do to be considered a living building altogether. So it includes sustainable site requirements and a certain amount of different types of use close by to your project, net zero or now net positive energy, net zero or net positive water. So you have to capture, clean, filter, use, infiltrate all of your water on site. It's a very rigorous red list of materials, far beyond what does your product label say about low emitting VOCs. No, they were pushing for transparency and excluding specific harmful chemicals. And then, of course, having equity in the built environment includes having access to critical resources, like being able to get to that beachfront, through your lovely property, and having accessibility, those kind of things. And then, of course, beauty and discussion of, education. What is the building trying to do? And all of that great stuff.
Tell me about how JUST fits into that.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the Living Future Institute, when they created the equity pedal, it was the first certification that had an area of focus on equity. And they wanted to push that even further than what they had at the beginning, which was they had like show materials are from within a certain distance from the project site. And, like the physical equity of like, don't block someone else's sunlight for their solar panels and that kind of thing. Well, then they said, like, we want the project teams that are involved with the projects to be having equitable practices, to make sure that there's a diverse array of people and that, they're making a living wage and those kinds of things. And so they put together a program for businesses to show their equitable practices, and that a certain amount of those businesses are required to be involved with the newer certifications.
Got it. And there, I think you also mentioned there's something else for healthy buildings, and that's a different certification.
Yeah, there's so many certifications out there. It can be kind of overwhelming.
Well, that's why we need people like you and GreeNexus to help us understand this.
Yeah. So there's now a well certification, and there's a kind of a similar path called Fitwell. And this helps with a wellness focus within the infrastructure of the built environment. So how can we make sure that water and air is appropriately filtered, and there's access to drinking water for everybody within the building? Does the drinking water taste good? I mean, if it tastes gross, like who wants to drink that? They're going to go down and buy a Coke instead. If they're selling food on site, it has to be appropriately labeled so people can really understand the additives, allergens, the amount of sugar, access to daylight. And so it's interesting because earlier on in the green building movement, they started to quantify that the people are the resource within the building. And so you're going to spend more on staff, you're more invested in the wellness of students. And, unfortunately, we still measure by test scores. And so they started to recognize that, putting in daylight and different features helps the performance of people in the building. And you're going to invest more financially and otherwise on the people that are in the building compared to how much you're going to spend on the building itself, how much you're going to save in electricity. It's going to be 10 times that amount for the people in the building. And so there was kind of a spin-off into a larger focus on wellness. And interestingly, the coalescing force around all of these different certifications is now becoming the UN SDGs. And so everything is starting to point back to, like, how does this strategy connect with this United Nations goal? And I think, all of these certifications are very interesting. And sometimes I like it when our clients come to us and say, we want to do the right thing. Forget about certification. Like, certification will come as a byproduct of our larger focus on, these specific goals that we have in mind. And so sometimes certifications can be limiting. We don't want to limit ourselves to be less creative because we're following directions. Sometimes we like to break the rules here at GreeNexus. Okay, more than sometimes.
I think we take a similar approach, just like there's a lot of different sustainability reporting frameworks we can use. And we really look at what are their goals. First of all, that's where it should be kind of grounded in what is your vision and what is your goals? And then we'll find something that works for you. But let's start from there. I think that's the same thing. What I'm hearing from you is let's start with those vision and goals, and we'll worry about everything else. We'll make it fit. Don't worry. Instead of you fitting that mold, let's make it fit you.
And I see a shift that's starting to happen, that we're trying to lead with a shift in terms of the way that I run my company is a fairly flat organization. Like, I love to hear from all the team members on what works, what doesn't. We try to be really open to learning from mistakes or, things that aren't working well. And I think that there's a lot to be learned in the way that buildings and the built environment is designed to be more inclusive in terms of the stakeholders that aren't just the financial decision makers, but the people that are in and around the building. If there's a reciprocal exchange with the community and the building users, that's going to make for a more rich and successful project in the long term than, someone who says, well, I'm only accounting to these investors. So we find that there's all kinds of interesting things that come out of more diverse discussion with all kinds of stakeholders.
Tell me more about that, because we are both based in Houston, where we love to just bulldoze over something and build it new. And I love to hear more about, what are the best practices to make sure that the community is involved, those different stakeholders are involved. Of course, there's, the investors are one of many stakeholders, but I would love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts about that, because again, we are a city that's, we like to bulldoze stuff and just build.
Yeah, I think that having a diverse array of stakeholders at the table to discuss the concerns is really critical. And, one thing that's really great about most of the certifications that are out there now recognize a strategy of an integrative charrette approach. And so it's nice from our approach, we can say, hey, you get recognition for doing this process, but this is my favorite part of the process. And sometimes it's as simple as the owners and investors and the designers having that charrette, which is still a good process. But what we like to do is include voices from the local ecology. So let's say you're in a specific watershed, or you're part of, Katy Prairie habitat, like having people from those nonprofits that can speak to give that voice to the concerns is important, as well as voices from the community. So maybe you have a community organization representative, or if there's somebody from like the local business development group, then there can be a better exchange of ideas, and you just never know what will come out of these discussions. I think as designers and consultants, it's like we know what we know what we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know. And so the
Yes.
more voices that are part of that discussion, all kinds of things can come out of that. In our early charrettes with the Monarch School, we were having some discussions with the teachers about the project. And we sort of made some assumptions as designers, like going into that, saying like, okay, maybe students with neurological differences can have a greater sense of focus if they are in a classroom environment with your standard 75 degrees Fahrenheit, under 60% relative humidity, that controlled environment that most of us enjoy in a commercial building without even knowing it. We're not conscious of that. And as we discussed that with the stakeholders, they said, well, no, we actually want this space to be a space where the students can practice getting dysregulated and uncomfortable. And how do they manage that? And how do they manage that with a larger goal in mind of being a net zero energy building? And so it completely changed the entire building. And it changed the location of the building. It changed the shape of the building. It changed everything. It really informed that design. In another project, we had a charrette about the charrette. It was for a new state park project. And what we recognized in the process of meeting with the park ranger and the designers and people that are representative of the city that's nearby was that this entire project was really about water and the hydrologic cycle and this lake that actually supplies the city with all of its water. And it was interesting because as part of this discussion, when we were talking about water, the park ranger said, well, we have the end of this water line. And when people aren't in the park all week long, we have to measure the chlorine in the water to make sure that the water is healthy. And when the chlorine isn't in the right amount, we have to bleed the line. And so basically they have to dump thousands of gallons of water to make sure, that the water is healthy in the line. And so we said, well, what can you do with that water to be an educational example for the park visitors to better understand the hydrologic cycle and the water that is drank by the town, ultimately? It's a couple of examples of unexpected things that came out of this process.
I love that. I think that just shows the value of the charrettes and engaging those stakeholders. These are two wonderful examples. You had a certain idea in mind as designers, and with those details, it actually really influenced the direction of the project in the end.
Yeah.
That's very cool. One of the things I think we've been talking about is a lot of kind of new projects, but what about existing buildings, older buildings? Is there, if someone decides actually to preserve something, is there a way forward for existing buildings, or is it really everything new? It basically has to be built new in order to be sustainable and equitable.
No, I would say that the most sustainable building is the building you don't have to build. And it's interesting because different certification paths recognize that, embodied carbon that's already in existing building stock. There's different ways for existing buildings to move forward. Some of the analysis is similar to the new buildings. We want to look at the water and do energy analysis and that type of thing. It is really important to benchmark buildings. So measuring through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, there's other platforms like USGBC has ARC, but that will help the building facility managers to understand over time what is the performance of the building, and to look at incentives when it comes up to time for like HVAC replacement and other capital improvements. That becomes, critical to help them go beyond, what they think that they can do based on their budgets. So, and then there's other ways to proceed with, if it's a truly historic building, there's historic tax credits and other things that can be utilized. It doesn't have to be that you rip out all the windows and open up all the walls and that sort of thing. There are ways to intervene with, what's existing. Yeah.
I always think back to that kind of recycling triangle where the first step is to reduce, the second thing is to reuse, and then you recycle, if there's no other option. I always think, going back to that, and it's good to know that there's a possibility for kind of existing buildings too to be retrofitted as well. So it's not just building new all the time, which requires a lot of energy and money and carbon and etc.
And I think there's innovative things that you can do for, existing buildings. We were working with Galveston Historic Foundation building. They were moving a building that got damaged during Hurricane Ike. And they were also targeting LEED for Homes certification. And I was talking with somebody over there about the fact that there was no insulation in the walls. And they were concerned because you have to be careful from a building science perspective. Like, you can't always just put insulation in the walls, because if they're not drying properly, then you can rot out all the wood. So you can have good intentions with bad results. And I said, well, if you want some airflow in the wall, but you also want to insulate, something akin to like packing peanuts would be really great. But there's not really something on the market that does that I know of. And they found some regraded foam, and they were able to use that in the walls. And that project ended up getting platinum certification, partially because they were able to find something that could have airflow movement in the wall, but also insulate. So we were excited to help them with some building science approaches.
Nice. This year is GreeNexus's 10-year anniversary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Amazing, just as a small business, from one small business owner to another, to be in business for that long. I'd love to hear a bit about your entrepreneurial journey, how you got started, and maybe we start from there. How did you start this in Houston about 10 years ago?
Oh my gosh. I'm a third generation entrepreneur, which I didn't even think about that until like last year. I never thought that I would own a business. My dad owned his own business. And so I remember just growing up and, witnessing his struggles. And so I was like, I'm not going to do all of that. But I was running a local office for a national green building company. And back in 2010, 2011, when the market was kind of down, they said, well, we're going to close our small regional offices, but you can, stay on as contract, help us close some things out. And if you want to keep on, then that's fine. So I was like, well, how am I going to say no to that? So, for the cost of a computer, I basically started GreeNexus, and I had a couple of clients because they kind of said, hey, you can keep on with them. And, so here we are 10 years later, but, that's not all of the story, of course, because every business has its highs and lows. I was keeping on like I was kind of making it up as I went along, because, it's like usually when you start a business, you're passionate about a thing, there's something that the business is doing that you're excited about, which is, which was my case. But I didn't have a robust course in, how to run a business and how to do all this back of house stuff. So I was just kind of doing the best with what I knew. And so that worked for a really long time. And I'm a big nerd when it comes to spreadsheets. I love Excel. I can make a spreadsheet for just about anything. And I'd probably be a little bit dangerous if I actually had more training in it. But so I had spreadsheets for, tracking all kinds of things. And so that worked for a really long time. In the beginning, it was just me, and Jamie Lawson then joined me, and then Rhiannon started doing some part-time work for me. And, it was going well for a while. And then my husband at the time got sick. He got diagnosed with cancer, and it forced me to have to delegate. And, I was definitely grateful to be able to take the time to, care for him during that journey and have a really great team that could, carry on with getting the project work done. And, I was still dealing with invoicing and proposals and doing all of that at that point. But it forced me to grow. That discomfort forced me to have to run the business in a different way. So from that perspective, we learned, we grew in terms of the way we did things. And then after about 18 months, he ended up passing away, unfortunately. And that was, a really difficult time. So again, having the ability to delegate so that I could kind of zombie through it. And many months after, going through that grieving process, I kind of felt like the business was like a sailboat. We had been sailing, we had been, harvesting the wind for quite some time, but, it was only so far that you could ride that wind. And so I felt like the time was coming that I really needed to get back, into sailing that sailboat. And a friend of mine had mentioned that she had participated in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program. And so I thought, man, I really need to, do something like that. I think it would really help. And so I ended up getting accepted into that program. And I think it really saved my business, just carving out the time to really sit down and refocus every time there was a session on understanding your financials, understanding marketing, like what is the messaging that you're putting out there, forced me to refocus and sit with other small business owners and like understand all of our pains and all of that. It was really amazing. So grateful to have the opportunity to be involved with that program. I highly suggest it to anybody who's, I think, been in business more than 2 years and has 1 or 2 staff members, I think can be involved with that or apply for that program. There have been some things I was really scared of until I got in that program. I was scared of having employees, it was just the fear of, what was it I mentioned before, the things that you don't know, or the things that you don't know that you don't know. I went to one module there and they were saying, if you're doing these things, then you're really not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So we kicked into high gear after the program, got all of everything in place and brought people on as employees. So that was year 5, I guess. But everybody had been on contract up until that point. And, that worked for us, but it was also limiting. Like not everybody wants to work on contract. Some people, they want full-time work, they want all the benefits and all of that stuff. And, now we have that. And it was during that time that I also made Rhiannon an offer to come on as our chief operations officer, which she accepted. Thankfully, she had just finished her degree at St. Thomas. So she was planning on leaving and I was kind of freaking out. So that was, one growing pain. And, we all went through this crazy quarantine. And as a business owner, that it's adding on to all of the stress of just going through a pandemic. Luckily for us, I had always intended for the company to be in the cloud. So we were able to switch to remote work, pretty quickly. But that was another growing pain, was figuring out how to hire people. And I have one team member that I have only met one time and another team member that I knew before the quarantine, but, we've only kind of caught up face to face twice since the time we've worked together. But, navigating that feeling of having a team spirit and cohesiveness, yet working remotely has been interesting. And then more recently, I have been involved with a program called Synergy that's for women and underrepresented companies and helping them to the next level of business. So that's also been really helpful. So 10 years later, and I'm like, how did this happen? So, when you and I talked about it, I was like, oh, wow, I mean, we've been through a lot in 10 years.
I would love to hear, for any small business owner out there, what are your tips about being resilient through personal challenges, pandemics. Maybe it's something that you mentioned before, that discomfort and that challenge forces you to grow and maybe not to be afraid of it. I don't know. What do you think? Like, would you give any tips on being a resilient person or company?
Yeah. I mean, I think discomfort definitely makes you grow. And I don't know that you could even force yourself to be in that kind of discomfort. It's not always something that you choose, right? Life happens when you're busy making other plans, I guess. And you just kind of roll with it. I think we tend to lead with our brains in our society, and our brains don't always connect with the reality of our emotions. Emotions happen at a much different scale and time than our thoughts. My husband passed away, and like it was 6 months later, and I'm like, why do I still feel like crap? And my mom is like, well, you were only married for 20 years, so it's going to take some time. So I think, you learn how to give yourself some grace and some space to really let yourself process things. And it doesn't happen in your brain where, I think in our society, we're telling ourselves like, go, 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 go. But I give myself some space to slow down and have a work-life balance. I think in the beginning of the company, I was very driven to all kinds. I was involved in so much. And to be honest, when David got his diagnosis, I was already burned out. And I think that that's what happens to business owners. I think that's part of why you see a lot of business owners crash and burn in the first 5 years, is because, how long can you really work 60 plus hours a week? Like, honestly. And so, yeah, just work-life balance, I think you got to step away and you got to learn to delegate. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think we're all learning a lot about that after the pandemic. I think everybody in our team, after that freeze that we had, when the freeze ended, it was like we were in the quarantine, we were in the freeze, we had, not that long before that, been in hurricane season, and we all just burned out. Like, okay, the power's back on, the heat's back on, and I can eat now. And I just burned out for like 2 days. I think I just laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. And I mean, sometimes you just need to take that time, because your body and your brain have to process, all of this stress. I've been learning a lot lately about how the body processes stress, and it's been very interesting. And I feel like it's really grounded the way that I process things. And after going through so many highs and lows in those last 10 years, I've started to see my patterns of bouncing back, and what works and what doesn't work. That's been a real blessing, and I mean, stress, but but grateful for it at the same time. Just slow down and be quiet and listen to your body and just take time to heal.
A lot of that resonates with me too. I think I took my first day off in probably 12 months, just on Friday, just because I'm like, I just need a mental health day.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It's
hard to take a break when you're an owner, because you're always connected.
You're always connected. You're always checking on what's going on, always thinking about what's on the to-do list, what we do need to do next, right? To grow the business, to make sure everyone's happy, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Anyways, I'm in tears. I'm going to take a moment just to dry my eyes, Amanda, because I think a lot, it's funny. I don't think we talked about all this when in our kind of pre-call, but my mother passed away when I was in my early 20s. And I think your experience with your husband and the way you talk about being a zombie for a while is how I feel. I wasn't a small business owner at that time. I didn't have the responsibility of managing, running a company and keeping it afloat. But a lot of that resonates with what I remember as well, 20 years ago when she passed as well, and having the disconnect between your brain that wants to just think you should be doing this and the kind of disconnect with what's going on emotionally, and the time disconnect that everything you need time for everything in a way to catch up.
Yeah.
That completely resonates. Amanda, I've loved having you on the show today and just chatting, getting caught up really in what's happening in the built environment. And I'm so excited to hear about net positive water, net positive energy, living buildings, healthy buildings, equitable buildings. First of all, thank you so much for joining me. And if people want to get in contact with you, with GreeNexus, what's the best way, first of all, for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can find us. Our website is GreeNexus.com, and we're also on LinkedIn and Facebook and other social media sites. So that's the best way. Or you can email me, Amanda@GreeNexus.com.
Okay, great. Some of the, I think, funny things that when we were talking before that I love that we're both Amandas. I think we're in the same, I haven't done the math. I feel like we're in that generation where there was a lot of Amandas in a very short amount of time. Like in my elementary school, really, there were 3 Amandas. For some reason that we both have businesses that start with G, GreeNexus, Global Affairs. I don't know how we landed on that. We're both native Houstonians, which is a rare breed, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
There's not so many of us anymore, even though I kind of grew up kind of further. I don't even the suburbs. I just feel like I'm kind of like you, maybe 5 years earlier. I'm like following you in my entrepreneurial journey, kind of, which is wonderful to hear your story and to hear how helpful some of these programs have been too. Just makes me want to like Google, okay, Goldman Sachs, how do I get in this?
Yeah. There's so many good things in Houston. I just feel so lucky, and I'm always happy to share, like you have a question about like, how do you do your timesheet? I have the same question, and I think we started talking on LinkedIn because you're like, do you have something that you use to do your proposals? And I was like, no, but when I figure it out, I will let you know.
we still don't have a great system yet. I mean, we have a system, but it's not, as efficient as hoping it would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we share a lot of commonalities that way. Amanda, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm so excited to see where things go from here, because I see that, we have a common focus in our passion about the environment and ESGs and all of this stuff. It all goes together, just looking forward to what emerges.
I'm hoping we can work together on a project one day. That would be super fun.
I think we will.
I've
just decided it's going to happen.
Good. Let's put that in the universe. We're going to work on a project together. Okay,
Thanks so much for having me again. I really appreciate it. And, any time I would be happy to come back.
Absolutely. This is Amanda Hsieh.
And this is Amanda Tullos.
And today it's the Amanda
and Amanda
show. Thanks for joining us.
Nerds are taking over the universe. So I'm happy to be in the nerd club.
Thank you for listening to ESG Decoded. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you consume yours, and follow ESG Decoded and Global Affairs Associates across social media platforms. Until our next episode, take what you learned today to drive long-term value for your organization by doing good for people and for the planet.